Do you want to learn how to steal customer credit card information from major retailers so you can buy anything you want?
Well, we can't help you with that. But among the many IT problems we solve, Barracuda's award-winning firewalls prevent hackers from taking your valuable data to the bank. Reclaim your network like 150,000 other businesses have. To learn more about protecting customer data and your reputation, visit barracuda.com/firewalls.
We're coming to you from the DraftKings.com podcasting studios. DraftKings.com, America's one-day fantasy sports site, where it's like a new season every time you play. DraftKings.com.
Welcome back to the NBA Lockdown Podcast, everybody. I'm Nick Friedell. I cover the Bulls for ESPN.com, and my friend Dave McMenamin covers the Cavs for ESPN.com. Dave, here we go, the beginning of free agency. It's the best part of the summer for every NBA fan. How you feeling?
Best part of the summer for every NBA fan. I think if you ask every NBA reporter, they would have a different way to describe it than that. But I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling good right now. I feel like I am staring at the foot of a mountain, and you and me and everybody else around the league are going to try to climb it without falling down over the next 2 weeks. This is what promises to be a pretty busy free agency period with a flurry of activity. It seemed like another year where we got a promise where the draft would be the precursor to all the movement, but I think teams kind of took a wait-and-see approach. But everything that we've been reading and the people we've been talking about and talking to, it seems to be that we're in for, a lot of players changing their jerseys come next training camp.
Well, you're staring at the foot of the mountain, Dave. And as we know, Golden State's at the top of that mountain. But LeBron runs the show pretty much everywhere else. And he can't get there yet in Cleveland. But it sounds like he's hoping to, although he opted out of that deal. And now his options are open for the time being, although you've been around him as much as anybody in the last year. Do you think there is any chance, at least in the short term going into next season, that he is anywhere else other than Cleveland?
No, I do not. I think he genuinely has been affected by the experience of coming back to Cleveland and can see what it means to the community there. Beyond that, he's a competitor. He knows that he was 2 wins away from his third championship, even missing 2 of his best players on his roster. And also, I think he wants to be a man of his word. And certainly when he made a pretty grandiose statement to Sports Illustrated's Lee Jenkins when he was leaving Miami, it wasn't about a 1-year rental proposition. So I fully expect him to be back. It's just a question of the machination that is developed to have that occur. And we're kind of waiting to see, just how much he's going to be involved in the free agency process, whether it's going to be a behind-the-scenes thing or whether he's going to, show up to a meeting where they're bringing in a prospective player or they're even trying to pitch their current players. That's going to be an interesting process. And then beyond that, what he does with his own contract, because he is perhaps the most influential player in the league right now. And I think if he takes a short-term deal, I think you could see other superstars around the league taking a short-term deal because they're like, well, LeBron's kind of setting the tone here, setting the example of how we should be approaching free agency, because it hasn't been like he's made a misstep throughout his career when it comes to managing, the type of salary he demands.
Well, Dave, let's dive into it right now because LeBron is that leader throughout the league and sets a tone for everybody else. Are we looking at a scenario here where, at least in the next couple of years, LeBron is going to continue signing these one-year deals, or at least these deals that have opt-outs after 1 year, so that he and every other player can cash in when the mega TV money flows into the league in the next couple seasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's appropriate you bring it up now because we were going through our notes and what we wanted to talk about in this podcast, and I guess we had scheduled it for later in the show, but this makes sense. This is the thing that is informing the entire league and their approach to this summer, because you're going from a cap that's $63 million this year, that's going to be a year from now, after next season, jump to $90 million, and the following season $108 million. So basically, you're making it 1.7 times the cap, almost doubling the cap within a 3-year span. Which is bonkers because the league is so used to incentivizing players a certain way based on the financial parameters that the executives have to deal with. And then I think this changes a lot of things. I mean, Zach Lowe wrote in his column on Grantland this week that up to 25 teams will be able to offer a max deal based on the way their salaries are currently constructed to a free agent in the summer of 2016. So if you know that, and you know that that next summer is going to be even wilder, if you are a free agent and you can maybe go outside your normal comfort zone and sign a short-term deal. Now, in LeBron's case, I think it's a different situation. He's not signing a short-term deal, in my opinion, to set himself up to potentially go to a third team in a year. For him, it's just all about compounding those raises that are built in to the CBA that he can take advantage of and make more money. But if you're another free agent that's out there, and maybe there's a team out there that you kind of like, but I don't know, it probably wouldn't be the safest pick, or it wouldn't be what you normally go for. You don't have to go and get locked into a 4 or 5 year deal. And also, I don't think it will be the public backlash if you go to a new team and you're like, oh, you're just a 1 year rental. No, a lot of guys are going to be in that situation because it's the smart financial decision to make. So, again, LeBron being ahead of the curve, he went into a contract like that last year. Whereas, his peers, like a guy like Carmelo Anthony, signed a full-term extension with the New York Knicks. LeBron went for that 1+1 deal, and it wouldn't surprise me, or actually, it would surprise me if he did anything other than doing that again this summer.
Dave, you bring up an interesting point with LeBron, and our colleague Colin Cowherd mentioned this on his show as well. None of us can predict the future as far as just how much the money is going to change the league and how that goes into LeBron's mindset moving forward. But Colin's point, and something that you and I have discussed on this podcast in the last couple months or so, is that if the Cavs can't keep Kyrie Irving healthy and he can't stay on the floor, and Kevin Love, and so we're clear, you still expect Kevin Love to be back in Cleveland starting next year?
I do. Yeah, absolutely, I do. And I'll explain later why I think so.
Okay, so with Irving and Love, Colin's point, and I've heard it from some fans, is if the Cavs can't keep Kyrie healthy or he can't stay on the floor, and LeBron can't get this team over the hump, he at least allows himself the possibility of leaving Cleveland again if he continues signing these 1 year deals, at least into when the salary cap is going to explode in the next couple seasons. In your mind, and you've talked to LeBron a bunch, even in the last couple months here, do you think right now that he's even considering going anywhere else? Do you think he is in Cleveland for the long haul here no matter what?
I personally do, but it doesn't mean that he has to be blindly faithful to Cleveland in the process of doing that.
Yeah.
I think, the guy has proven to be incredibly successful away from the realm of basketball, nearly rivaling his success on the court, which is a wild thought to consider. And through that, you learn to have an analytical mind and have a business mind and do things where in this example, it's all about leverage, and it shouldn't be looked at as a insult to the Cavs or a statement that he isn't fully behind the franchise. It's just a way to make sure that his interests are protected in the process. And his interests, as we know, he has an aspiration to be considered the greatest basketball player of all time, and the only way he can achieve that is through accumulating more championships. And so if by him constantly putting pressure on the Cavs every summer to give me a roster that can perform, or there is a chance I could leave, even though that wouldn't maybe be my preference, but if you put me in a situation where I have a team that I don't think I have a chance with, just for my own legacy's sake, I would have to seriously consider bolting. I think it just protects him and protects his dream and his goal, which is to become or have a chance to be considered the greatest player of all time when he's finished playing.
Dave, I respect the hell out of LeBron for doing things the way he's done them with Cleveland and coming back and signing these deals. Having said that, and I think it's the right move for him. Having said that, if this guy leaves Cleveland again, he's just going to get completely shredded, I feel like. Just totally shredded.
Well, there's certainly a shelf life. If he doesn't come back to Cleveland and go through the process, and he even said in his letter, we've talked about this before, that it doesn't happen overnight, and you got to have patience, and patience is the one quality that LeBron feels like is maybe the thing he has to work at, a character trait that is lacking in him. If he says all those things and then completely turns his back on them and bolts, he will be. He'll be ripped apart. All the goodwill that he generated from returning to Cleveland will be completely dismissed. He will become a villain once again in Cleveland, probably to a point of having it be an irreparable situation. And I think the overall respect for him around the league from fans and from basketball observers, which is maybe at an all-time high right now, even though he lost in the finals from the type of performance he put on, that will be dashed as well. So, that's the thing. Okay, is this like a show of leverage? Does the Cavs ultimately have it because they know that
right.
The damage that would go LeBron's direction if that occurred? I don't know. You like to think, and you like to see the best in people, and you like to think that Dan Gilbert realizes that he made a terrible mistake when LeBron left. LeBron realizes he made a mistake as well, though in the manner he left. And both of them want to make up for that. And for LeBron, that means committing to Cleveland and staying in shape and keeping his body performing at an optimal level, even though he's entering his 30s. For Dan Gilbert, that means opening up that wallet. And as long as both sides do that, they'll be fine.
So you have the word there on Cleveland, who figures to come into next season without question is the favorite in the East, and maybe, Dave, the favorite in the league, given that a healthy LeBron, a healthy Kyrie, and assuming he does re-sign a healthy Kevin Love with whatever pieces the Cavs add after that, can really be dynamic in their second year together. Behind the Cavs, at least in the East, is everybody else, and it feels like that line starts again with the team I cover, the Chicago Bulls. And as far as the Bulls are concerned, heading into this free agency period, there has been a lot made about Jimmy Butler and his future in Chicago. And, Dave, I've never gotten the sense that Jimmy was going anywhere, at least in the short term, because of the fact that he's a restricted free agent. And John Paxson, the executive VP of the Bulls, and Gar Forman, the GM, have been very consistent dating back to January that they would match anything that Butler were to sign if he signed another offer sheet, even if that's a max extension. And what we've seen recently, and our friend Chris Broussard reported this Tuesday, saying that the Bulls have already extended the max qualifying offer sheet, a qualifying offer and then a max offer sheet of 5 years. And Jimmy and his reps have canceled meetings with every other team. Now it's a matter of how much money Jimmy wants to sign for, which will be the max, whatever he wants, and how many years, more importantly, Dave, he wants to lock himself into in Chicago. My guess right now, the safe bet seems to be 3 years, around $50 million, or a 4-year deal that has an opt-out after the third year so that Jimmy can cash in twice. And Jimmy Butler is in a unique position because LeBron is, as we know, he's on a plane all by himself. LeBron signing these 1-year deals or the 2-year deal with an opt-out after one. Players like Jimmy Butler can sign a max extension. And for clarification out there for the fans, a max extension would be about 5 years, a little over $90 million.
Oh, and for his tier, yeah.
Right,
yep.
for his tier. So,
right.
So if you're Jimmy, you have that option for 5 years, a little over $90 million. Or you can say to yourself, and he's already rolled the dice once, Dave. He turned down the Bulls' offer of about $11 million a year over 4 years before the season started, which in hindsight
it's almost insulting, right, to hear it in hindsight.
It's unbelievable, but I'm not going to sit here and say, oh well, the Bulls made a huge mistake not doing it, because at the time, if I were Gar and Pax, I don't think I would have signed Jimmy to $12 million a year either. He hadn't shown to be this kind of player yet, an all-star who could score 20 points a night on top of being one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. Now, for Butler, moving forward, if you are Jimmy and his reps, I think the best option may be to sign the 3-year deal worth about $50 million, or the 4-year deal with the opt-out after 3. And then, if he keeps playing at this level, Mr. McMenamin, he's going to sign a max or close to max extension as an unrestricted free agent in a few years. And that could be worth upwards of $190, $200 million.
Right.
So if you're Butler right now and you're confident, and you've been around him plenty just like I have, there aren't many more confident guys in this league right now than Jimmy Butler. That's probably the way to go, right?
Yeah, I think so. And again, I don't think that's a reflection of his commitment to the Bulls, because, I mean, there are rumors out there about the Lakers connection with Jimmy Butler, and not necessarily sure where they started. But it seems to be that's been, ever since he didn't sign the deal with the Bulls before the season started, that the Lakers name popped up. Now, yeah, maybe he ends up a Laker someday, but I don't think if in this summer he does not sign a full max extension in a shorter deal, it doesn't mean he's necessarily eyeing a specific team down the line. I think he's just eyeing that specific contract down the line.
Yeah.
It's just business. I mean, and I think even for myself, because we've been anticipating something like this ever since the TV deal became in place, which I think was in November, or it might have even been in October, that this balloon would occur. You have to retrain your mind as a reporter, as a front office member, as a player, as a fan, to recognize that this is a situation we've never been through before. So don't judge players the way you judge players before, because there's a different set of rules.
No doubt. And if you're Butler in the Bulls, Dave, here in Chicago, one of the big questions is, and where all the speculation has kind of turned in the last few weeks, is how is Jimmy's relationship with Derrick Rose? It's something that's gotten a lot of play on Sports Talk Radio here. And I know fans are concerned because they look at Jimmy and they look at Derrick and they say, well, there's no way this team's going to be able to get to where they want to go if these two guys don't like each other. And as somebody who's been around this team now going on 6 years, I just don't see the kind of tension that has been played up in some avenues in the media.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jimmy wants to be an alpha dog on this team, but at the core, I think Jimmy still respects the hell out of Derrick, and vice versa. And I think both guys understand that they need each other now to reach that dream of winning a title. So is it something to watch? Sure. Keep an eye on. The issue for Jimmy is that a lot of people have been asking me, well, has he changed? Has his personality, has his demeanor changed? And Dave, I tell you, yeah, it has. From the time that Jimmy came into the league as an affable young guy, he always loves to say he's from Tomball, Texas, not Houston. He loves to play that up and wear his cowboy boots and his hat. I think Jimmy realized in the last year, as he became more prominent in the league, he became an all-star, that he wanted to be treated a little differently. He wanted to. He wanted all the things that come with being one of the more recognizable stars in the league. And is that wrong? No. And Jimmy's 25 years old. I know if you and I were in that position, about to sign a contract worth close to $50+ million in this case, we'd be living the life too.
But Nick, what do you think happens? And I get you because again, I'm not as close to it as you are, but I've covered a bunch of teams and been on teams, and you see dynamics between the superstars or the stars or the supposed most impactful players, and there's many ways to skin a cat, I guess I should say. And these guys, they don't have to be best friends, and they can still make it work. And there can be best friends who don't perform as well on the court. So, but what do you think happens if this was Jimmy's ascending year? Clearly, made a name for himself, legitimately put himself on the map. But what do you think if he actually eclipsed Derek? And I mean, maybe you could argue that he did just based on performance, but Derek is Chicago's son, and Derek has had the Adidas campaign that's continuing to make him just as relevant as a figurehead in the game, even though he hadn't been playing as much. But what happens if Jimmy has another great year and he has the Jordan campaign behind him, and then he starts to get notoriety through that, and then maybe the league starts using him in the Game Time app and commercials and stuff like that you see over and over and over again on NBA TV and things of the like, and so he becomes a bigger face of the league. Do you think that would be something that Derek would be able to handle?
Dave, it's a great question, and as we sit here today, the most honest answer I could give you is I don't know. I really don't know, because Derek has been the man in Chicago since the moment he was drafted here.
Right.
I mean, he's been the guy. And what people need to understand, for those who haven't followed the Bulls as closely over the last few years, is before Derrick Rose got hurt, Dave, he ran the city. I mean, this kid was everywhere, and he was beloved. He was beloved. And as we know, the perception changed when he didn't come back the following year off the ACL injury. It was his choice. He made that choice, and a lot of fans turned on him for it, and then he got hurt, obviously, the next year when he tore the meniscus. But to your point, I'm not sure if Derek would be able to handle that. I think Derek desperately wants to win, and he desperately wants to win in Chicago. But I would also argue this as far as Jimmy Butler is concerned. I don't know, having watched Jimmy for every game pretty much that he's played since he's been in the league, Dave, I don't know how much better he can be. I think Jimmy is a great player, but truthfully, I'm kind of shocked that we're even having this conversation. Because 2 years ago, Jimmy was a guy who really didn't play much under Tibbs, and the only reason he got into the rotation and got that chance was because Luol Deng got hurt.
Yep.
And he put in all the work last summer, and he deserves all the credit and the money that is coming his way. But to go from a guy who didn't have a reliable jump shot to a guy who is now being asked to score 20-plus points a night on top of guarding guys like LeBron night after night and playing close to 40 minutes, although I think those minutes won't be as high under Fred Hoiberg. The issue for me looking ahead is I just don't know if we haven't seen close to the ceiling on where Jimmy's game can go. And that would be the trepidation I would have if you're a member of the Bulls front office looking towards the future.
Fair enough. I think, though, I mean, maybe offensively he's hitting his ceiling, but, like, just defensively, and, again, I'm going to be so biased based on his performance in the second round between the Cavs and the Bulls, because to me he was just so dynamic and just jaw-droppingly strong in that series. If he's going to give you that, I mean, I don't think you don't need a higher ceiling there. You know what I'm saying? Like,
are they paying to watch Jimmy Butler play? Do you think he can? Let's put it that way. Do you think he can elevate his game and his persona, his personality, to a point where people are going to pay good money to watch him play the way they have even now to watch Derrick Rose play?
Right, and that's a fair point. And I think, but again, it's funny because the whole idea of a max contract, that used to be, I think, a necessity there.
Yeah.
Is the guy going to put butts in the seat? Is the guy going to, get people to pay and see him come play?
Are they going to buy his jersey?
Right. But if the structure of finances for the league is such that they are making, the teams and the owners are making so much money off TV, does it matter as much?
Yeah, and
to have that conversation, that there's, as long as they're helping the team win.
Right. And Dave, in that regard, Jimmy Butler is kind of the case study of the new NBA.
Right.
Because he's 25 years old. I mean, there is really no telling. While I don't think that he can push that much more out of his game, maybe he can, and maybe he can develop an even bigger following nationally. But you are absolutely right, and the point is well taken in that, does it even matter at this point? Because there's so much money coming into the game, and there are so many different areas for teams to generate that cash flow, and the Bulls have been making millions upon millions for years. Do you just say, okay, if you're the Bulls, we're going to be facing LeBron, you'd think, in the next 8 postseasons, possibly. You have to sign Jimmy Butler. I mean, there's no doubt. You have to sign a guy who can stay in front of him that way, and who can be a focal point of your offense. So it's an intriguing question, but there's no doubt the days of having to sign a guy to a max deal because of the influence he may have on that team or that city in other areas, that's probably gone. And that's due to the popularity of this league and the money that has been generated because of it.
Right. So just housekeeping, I mean, outside of Jimmy, that's pretty much what the Bulls need to do, big picture, right, with their roster. They have Derrick under contract. They have Powell under contract. They have Joe under contract. They have Taj under contract. So in terms of the big pieces, they got pretty much everything they need to have other than Jimmy already taken care of. Am I right?
You are. There's one guy whose future affects both of our teams, actually, and that would be Mike Dunleavy. And the Bulls are absolutely hoping to re-sign him, Dave. Gar Forman was on our radio station here in Chicago, ESPN 1000, after the draft, and he said the hope is that Mike returns. Mike wants to return, and he was up front that that's a guy that they're kind of pinpointing here. What remains to be seen is, if you're Mike Dunleavy, what are your options? And to that point, our friend Mark Stein reported Tuesday that one of the teams that has a major interest in Dunleavy is the team that you cover day-to-day in the Cleveland Cavaliers. And one of the reasons for that is because of LeBron.
Right.
So knowing that, Dave, if you're Mike Dunleavy and the money is comparable, and Mike made about, I believe, $4 million last year, and figures to make at least that because he was a very solid contributor under Tibbs for the last 2 seasons in Chicago. And aside from an ankle injury that put him out for about a month last year, he played in a ton of games for the Bulls. But if you're Dunleavy and you're 34, 35 years old and you've been in this league for a long time and the money's close, do you stay where you and your family are comfortable in Chicago in a system that figures to benefit a veteran like him under Fred Hoiberg and not under Tibbs a little more throughout the season? Or, Dave, if you're Dunleavy and LeBron James is calling and saying, hey, I want you on my team, come chase a ring with me, where do you go?
Yeah, and I think you would know Mike better than I do, having been around him. Like, I think it just comes down to his personality because, listen, the guy's going to be entering his 13th season, turning 35 in September, as you mentioned. He's been through so many stages of his career already, from those young, exciting Golden State teams he was on to, darn near close to being a star in Indiana himself personally for a couple of years, to being a consummate role player in Milwaukee and Chicago the last couple of years. He hasn't been on that, straight-up contender team yet. I mean, I guess maybe this last Bulls team might have been the best team he's been on. If just memory serves, some of those Indiana teams were certainly strong he was on. But is that a lure there? I mean, and then the question also is, the Cavs only really have 2 ways to get guys into their team outside of re-signing the players that they have birthright to. They have a mini mid-level exception, and they have Brendan Haywood's expiring contract that balloons to worth north of $10 million should they make a qualifying offer, and then that could be a trade chip. The Haywood contract, that will not come into play with Mike Dunleavy as unrestricted free agent. So the question is, do you want to commit your mid-level exception, that one-shot deal on him at $3.4 million a year, roughly 3.5, for a guy who's 35 years old, knowing your team history where last year you went after established veterans who certainly helped build a culture of professionalism within your organization, guys like Sean Marion, Mike Miller, James Jones, but who didn't necessarily perform on the court, output production-wise quite as much as you would have hoped. And, is there a point of diminishing return with a guy like Mike Dunleavy? Now, if you can convince him to come 1 year for veteran minimum, oh my gosh, yeah, let's do that. but if you only have that one shot, I think you got to go after a guy who's 25 and not 35, and someone who can grow within the team over the next couple of years.
And those are probably all the reasons, Dave, as we sit here, that the odds are still very high that Dunleavy stays in Chicago.
Right.
Because it is clearly a priority. If re-signing or figuring out the Jimmy Butler deal is priority 1 for the Bulls, 1A is making sure that Dunleavy stays in Chicago because he has fit into the culture that's been built here, and they see him as a key component of what they want to do in the short-term future. So I think that Dunleavy, when it's all said and done, unless there's another team that comes in, and it would have to be a veteran-laden team that is on the verge of winning a la Cleveland or Chicago, I think Dunleavy is a guy who will stay where he's at. And it's going to be intriguing to see how that plays out over the next few days or so. But so that's the wrap from our beats in Chicago, in Cleveland. Let's take a break here on the NBA Lockdown podcast with Nick Friedell and Dave McMenamin. And Dave, when we come back, we're going to dive deeper into free agency across the league, and we're going to have 3 guys who we think should stay where they're at right now, and 3 guys who should leave their current situations and find a better one.
Yeah, I'll be the marriage counselor and tell the people who should stay. And, Nick, you can be the divorce lawyer and tell the people who should go.
I hope that's not a sign of future things to come.
God.
Oh, boy. Okay, so keep it locked here on the NBA Lockdown podcast. We'll be back with you shortly.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Welcome back to the NBA Lockdown podcast, everybody. I'm Nick Friedell. I cover the Bulls for ESPN.com. I'm here with my friend Dave McMenamin. He covers the Cavs for ESPN.com. And Dave, as we go into free agency here on July 1, there are a lot of different names in play. You and I have broken down the names, the numbers. Let's start with three guys who you think should stay in the current situation that they're in at the moment.
Right, and okay, grass is greener. We've all been victim of that at times in our lives, and I don't fault someone for seeing what's out there, but I do think there's some guys who are out there that could end up regretting leaving a pretty good situation they're in. So I'll just throw the names out there first, and we can dive into the conversation.
You got it.
Marc Gasol in Memphis, DeAndre Jordan with the Clippers, and Kevin Love with the Cavaliers are three guys I believe will be best served staying with the team they're currently with.
Well, you're closest to Kevin Love. You've seen how that situation has played out in Cleveland throughout the year. There's been a lot of talk that, Dave, he may not be very happy in Cleveland. There's been talk for years about Kevin Love possibly ending up back on the West Coast where he grew up, maybe L.A. Your gut tells you, though, that he stays in Cleveland for the foreseeable future, right?
Yeah, and there's a couple reasons here, and it's not just the money, and it's not, and I'm not just dismissing what was a difficult year for him despite the team's success, but I think it's about what are you going to be about? What's going to be the thing that defines you? How are you going to be viewed around the league? What are you looking to get out of basketball if you're going to define yourself as a basketball player? And there's not a better basketball situation for him, certainly not in the short term. And for him to uproot what he had established in Minnesota, even though he never made the playoffs, he was an important player to that city and to that franchise, to that sports culture. To uproot that for a chance at, for a season that I think most people thought would have gone better for Cleveland. Now, of course, the way they turned it around and got to the finals, all things considered, it was a successful year. But it wasn't like this whirlwind of everything went the right way for them. And I think with the lessons that Kevin has learned, with being able to mesh with some of the personalities in that locker room, being able to fit his game to guys like LeBron and Kyrie Irving, and it wasn't an easy process because he seemed to get further and further away from the basket on a consistent basis, but it worked. And they went through a stretch late in the season where they went 33-3 with Kevin Love, still putting up pretty solid numbers around 16-9. If you feel like you unlocked that formula for success late in the year, and you now have the familiarity with your teammates, you have a full training camp of implementing the type of offensive sets and defensive sets that were working for you the previous season, and all you really have to commit to, as we were talking about earlier in the podcast with the other guys around the league, is to 1 year.
Right.
Do it. See this project through. See where it can take you. Because, the guy, there's no way he can look himself in the mirror and say, this team isn't close to winning a championship. If he's a competitor you'd hope him to be, he was probably watching the playoff run and trying to insert himself mentally into that lineup, thinking that, man, I could have made that play here or made that play there, and, we're getting a ring. So, to me, yeah, the Cavs are not a low-profile team. There's a lot more intangibles to going to work every day with the Cavs than, some of the other teams around the league. But it's not like he's going to avoid the spotlight if he goes to L.A. He's not going to avoid the spotlight if he goes to New York Knicks. And even it'll find him, if he went to a lower profile team like a Portland or a Houston or a Phoenix, because I think a lot more will fall directly on him.
Yeah.
So with all those things considered, put it in one big bowl and take a scoop out. I think the guy should be looking to stay in Cleveland. And I wouldn't fault him financially or just, protecting himself moving forward if he did a short-term deal. But I think the right thing to do and the logical thing to do would to re-sign with Cleveland this summer.
The one question I have from a distance is with his relationship with LeBron. We saw the pictures floating around on the internet of those two meeting up poolside, discussing the future. You would figure. Do you think those two guys like each other, and do you think they can coexist for the long term?
I don't think they're the same type of person, but I think there's got to be ways that they can respect one another and find common ground. And also, I respect the reporters who had reported on that meeting between the two of them, but there's no way they did not discuss free agency. You're not hanging out with the elephant in the room, and and that's not going to come up. I'm not saying this is a source thing I'm saying right now. I'm just saying I know how life works. It's going to come up, man. You're two pro basketball players.
Right, with two guys who've spent every day together for 8 months, or almost every day together. Even if they really don't like each other that much or the personalities clash, even if it was the worst-case scenario, it's still going to come up.
Right. No, I don't
happens.
I don't think that's the evidence that's backing up my claim that Kevin should come back to Cleveland because he hung out at the pool, because we know last summer LeBron took a flight from Vegas to Miami with Dwayne Wade, and then the hours later basically announced that he was leaving Miami. So just hanging out together doesn't equate staying together as teammates. But you have, in my opinion, you read it as a good sign. And no, I don't. Listen, the guys aren't best friends, but I think that's okay. And I think, honestly, both of them get along great with Mike Miller. And Mike Miller just opted into his deal, and he's going to be there next year. And he's going to be a connective tissue between those guys again. Not that I'm saying that Mike Miller's role last year was a peacemaker between the two. That's not I'm saying that at all. I'm saying that when you have a culture established on that team where and guys looking to keep guys together and make connections, I don't see it going further south than it did during their first year together when, it got uncomfortable for a little bit with LeBron making those tweets directed at Kevin Love and some of the comments, whether Kevin was just being honest or not when he did that radio interview and says Russell Westbrook's the MVP and not LeBron, that wasn't doing the right thing. You're supposed to support your teammates. So,
right.
Yeah, there was some tension last year, but I think having, been along every step of the way for this Cavs team since it's been put together, there's so much positivity around them after that finals run, where I think, whereas last year it was pressure on uncertainty going into things, this year it would be evidence that we can perform together and positivity and motivation because we were so close to getting there, that would be the thing that guys lean on in tough times versus, oh, man, well, I'm not getting touches like I did in Minnesota.
So you got Kevin Love staying in Cleveland. Let's go out to Los Angeles where we've got DeAndre Jordan as another likely candidate of a guy who will look around but ultimately decide to stay with the Clippers.
Yeah, and I'm not saying he will do that. I'm saying he should do that.
Right. Okay.
Because, our guy, Tim McMahon, ESPN reporter based in Dallas, does a lot of stuff with the Mavericks and the Cowboys. He has it, based on his sources, that the Mavericks would be the most likely team for him to leave for And I think it was in Tim's report that, basically his source says 50-50 between Mavericks and Clippers. But we know that, the Lakers are going to pitch him, and assumedly Kobe Bryant will be involved in that pitch process to some extent. And, that's pretty intriguing. But, and there'll be other teams that have interest, of course, in DeAndre. But to me, he gets to be a part of a team that has an identity, knows how to play with one another. Where's he going to find another big man combination between, we talked about being friends and whatnot. Him and Blake Griffin have a genuine thing going on dating back to college.
Right, they're close friends.
Right. They also know how to play with one another.
Yeah.
And Blake Griffin is an excellent passer in terms of making quick decisions. And, Chris Paul gets all those hockey assists because, he puts Blake in a position to then find DeAndre in the backside for a lob. And that's not that easy to create. Even if DeAndre has arms the length of a airplane and can jump, just as high. I don't know if he can replicate that situation. I don't know if he can replicate the situation where he has a fan base who supports him even with his free throw woes. I mean, that's something that could turn. I just feel like having a pass first point guard and Chris Paul on his side, and also with that team, I'm not convinced that the Clippers window, even though they lost in the second round, was disappointing after they beat the Spurs in the first round, especially the way that they kind of wilted at the end against the Rockets. I don't think their championship window is closed. In my opinion.
Dave, that was my next question. In that the Clippers faded, absolutely, especially in Game 6 against Houston, and they didn't get it done. But do you still believe that this team can come back together? They add Lance Stevenson. Doc Rivers is in charge, seemingly on all levels there, both on and off the floor. Do you believe that this team can win it all next year?
I do. I think they are still on that short list, that 5-6 team list, at least on mine. That I think, they, of course, they're not done, and they got to make sure DeAndre stays, and they got to fill up their roster with guys that actually help them, unlike some of the swing and the misses that they made last year with guys like Spencer Hawes. I do. As long as they have that core of Chris, Blake, and DeAndre, and Doc at the helm, and then of course, Lance, I think he very well could discover some of the game that he seemingly left in Indiana. I think they are right there, and of course they need DeAndre to stay right there.
So we've got DeAndre Jordan staying in Los Angeles. Dave, the third person on the list here is a guy I know we both figure will stay where he's at, and a lot of people around the league certainly figure that he will stay where he's at, and that is Marc Gasol in Memphis.
Right, and this is, I guess there's probably more wiggle room on the last two guys. I said where, people would think Love and DeAndre would consider situations more so. We've seemingly known for a while that it seems like Memphis is the best place for Marc Gasol, and the latest reports are that he has no plans to meet with other teams. So you'd think that pretty much locks up the fact that he'll remain a Grizzly, but I just think that's a good thing. He is the bedrock there that, he's a franchise player. And they've built around him, and they've turned their team into a program. And there aren't that many teams that you can describe that or use that description for around the league, and they certainly are one of them. And, maybe there's an allure to New York, and Phil Jackson, of course, has such a great relationship with Mark's older brother. But why not just stay where you are? Again, I don't think that team's so far out of the conversation as well. And tough it out and make your money and continue to establish your connection to the community, and St. Jude's Hospital is there, and the Salt family we know is so involved with that charity. I think you stay, and that's what you do. And they still are going to have talent next year. He can play with. I just think, to me, the other options out there, there's too many question marks versus what he would be leaving.
So the stay list here is Kevin Love, DeAndre Jordan, Marc Gasol. And Dave, what strikes me in listening to you and going over the list is these are three guys on three teams that they're on right now who we both believe at least have a shot to win.
Right.
They're on that list. And when you look at the leave list here, and we start looking at the other side of things, the first guy on that list, and we'll go through the names here very quickly, LaMarcus Aldridge, Monte Ellis, and Greg Monroe. The three teams that are on that list right now in Portland, Dallas, and Detroit, I don't think either of us would have them on that list of teams that you think, okay, they're right there, they can go win a title.
Right.
But
and there were times that I would say Portland, early in the season, Wes Johnson's healthy, Damian Lillard doing his thing before LaMarcus hurt his thumb. And maybe they were creeping onto that list, or maybe making me think about it, because I certainly respect Terry Stotts as the head coach as well. But to me, the Batum move leaves a lot to be desired. I have a hard time believing that made their team better. I don't think Gerald Henderson's a bad player, but I just don't think he brings both sides of the ball the way that Batum did.
Right, he doesn't get you that much closer. So with Aldridge, he's been in Portland close to a decade. He's developed himself in the community. But, Dave, all Portland has done in that time is really just continue to get bounced in the Western Conference playoffs. They've never made that deep run that would lead you to believe that they're really close, like we're talking about. And if you're Aldridge, and I was reading earlier, he's got a home in California, close to L.A. There's a familiarity there. San Antonio's going to make a push. He'd have to take a little bit less money, but they're one of those teams that you mentioned that has a program, won 5 titles under Greg Popovich. They figure to have a chance, and they're also close to Austin, where he went to school at the University of Texas, and then Dallas also figures to have some interest in him as well. If you're LaMarcus Aldridge, and those are your options, including staying in Portland, and just seeing what's happening because you have built that comfort level there, where do you think that Aldridge lands?
Well, I think there's two that stick out to me as situations that I could see him really enjoying in a short amount of time. The Spurs, obviously, because I think he could legitimately be playing in the NBA Finals next year if he goes there.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, who can say no to that? And then, of course, you mentioned the proximity to University of Texas and Texas native, and he's looked up to Tim Duncan his whole career. And, and again, us being sports writers, always looking for stories, how poetic would it be, kind of, not that he's quite as young as Duncan was when he played with David Robinson, but, Tim Duncan gets to play the David Robinson role to LaMarcus's young Tim Duncan. That's just beautiful to me. And the other situation would be the Lakers. And I know the Lakers have won, I think, a combined 49 games over the last 2 years, so you wouldn't necessarily look at them as such an attractive place. But from my sources familiar with what's going on in Portland, or what has gone on in Portland, there has been a tension between LaMarcus Aldridge and Brandon Roy, and LaMarcus Aldridge and Damian Lillard, based on the kind of hierarchy of stars there. And, yeah, okay, Kobe's still going to be Kobe next year. But it would be ostensibly LaMarcus Aldridge's team in a year. And he would have some young pieces around him. I was a big fan of D'Angelo Russell. That draft pick, Jordan Clarkson had some game. I think they are hoping that Julius Randle can play some three. That's what they've kind of been developing him as through his rehab process. And so you're not really getting a redundancy there, allowing LaMarcus to play inside. You got a fun, exciting roster, and you're the face. I mean, honestly, covering the Lakers for 6 years, there's nothing better than being a LA Laker on a winning Laker team in LA.
Yeah.
I can see a lot of appeal there too. So those are the two situations to me where, if you're going to go, you're actually putting yourself into a pretty good life right away.
And Dave, if you're Aldridge and you haven't gotten a chance to win at the highest level, I'm with you. What would be most intriguing to me is San Antonio. But as we've seen over and over in this league, it's always about the money.
Yeah.
It's always about the money. And if you're Aldridge and you're really in the prime of your career, are you willing to take less to go chase a title? Because I'm with you. If Aldridge goes to San Antonio, that's the revitalization I feel like they need. He can be that next piece to help push them back over the top again. I just don't know if he, at this point in his career, is willing to take that kind of cut, to take that kind of chance.
Right, and I think that remains to be seen, and he's going to have to figure that out. But again, maybe the assumption's been based on where he's at in his career, age-wise and experience-wise, that maybe seeking a long-term deal. But teams can get creative, and if R.C. Buford and Greg Popovich are willing to, maybe offer him a shorter-term contract or agree to terms for the shorter-term contract, maybe he can have his cake and eat it too, and go and win, and then re-up and get his money as well.
The next person on our leave list, as we break down impending free agency here, is Monte Ellis. And Dave, I read a great story on Grantland over the weekend about how Monte Ellis was the perfect person for the Mavericks at that time because they needed to get through the breakup, essentially. They needed to get through the remnants of winning the title. And while Monte looked good early on and seemed to be fitting in at the end, he wasn't speaking to the media out there in Dallas, and he wasn't fitting in the way that a lot of people had hoped. The issue, if you're Monte Ellis, is you've clearly developed this reputation in the league as a gunner and a guy who's going to get his shots up. Where do you see him possibly fitting if he is to be out in Dallas and land somewhere else?
Well, one team that's been reported as having interest in him by ESPN's Chris Broussard is the Indiana Pacers. And you look at the Pacers and you look at what they've been through from being kind of the Sacramento Kings to those Lakers, Kobe Shaq teams, kind of the same way they were with the LeBron, Dwayne Wade Heat teams. And then Paul George gets hurt and Lance Stevenson goes to Charlotte, and you're like, what happened to this team? Even though they did make a playoff push last year. I think you give a dynamic scorer like him on that group in the East with Paul George healthy, and you're rebooted back to a place where would I doubt that team could maybe be a top 4 team in the East? I think they have a pretty darn good shot.
Are they on your list of title contenders legitimate next year?
Well, I would just say no because I still need to see that Paul George is the pre-Vegas USA training camp Paul George before that tough injury that we were both in the house for. But I think they are a team that I know the Cavs wouldn't want to play them in the playoffs. I mean, the Cavs had their problems with the Pacers in the regular season last year, even with Paul George out. I think they become one of the feared teams in the Eastern Conference, and whether that's good enough to win the championship, obviously we know that the West is still going to be stronger no matter pretty much how free agency shakes out across the league. They're a team to be reckoned with.
Dave, the best division in basketball going into next year right now, to me, is the Central in the East. It is just going to be loaded because you have the Cavs, you have the Bulls, you have the Pacers, as we just discussed. You have Milwaukee with Giannis, the Greek Freak, Jabari Parker, Michael Carter-Williams, Jason Kidd, seemingly getting his show together there in Milwaukee. And then you have what figures to be an improving Detroit team. Although on our list here, we have Greg Monroe going elsewhere. Where do you see Monroe possibly landing in the next week or so?
Well, the reports have been for a while, and I think Frank Eitzel of the New York Daily News was the first to be on this, that the New York Knicks will be actively pursuing Greg Monroe, and I think in Frank's report, in conjunction with Aaron Aflalo, and that would be kind of the first pieces that Phil gets to go after as the GM. Outside of, obviously, they got to re-sign Carmelo last summer, and that was a big deal. But, I just don't think that he was a fit in Detroit under Stan Van Gundy. Of course, they did get rid of Josh Smith, so, I guess in a way they prioritized him over Smith. But it just didn't seem like maybe we were seeing everything that we could see out of Greg Monroe. And to go to a situation in New York where they run an offense that big men get a lot of touches and certainly big men who can pass and make decisions on the offensive end, they are allowed to flourish in their game. And it would be an attractive situation for me if I were Greg Monroe, and probably a more attractive situation than what's going on in Detroit. Not that I doubt Stan Van Gundy, and I do like some of the pieces they've gotten there, but I still think, there's some bit of a meshing process still needs to occur there. Not that doesn't have to happen in New York as well, but I'd like to see what he would do in that offense.
And Dave, let's be real. Where would you rather live, Detroit or New York City?
Hey, man, you're starting to sound like my followers. Like, where'd you rather live, L.A. or Cleveland? I'm not getting into that conversation.
Well, the Knicks have lots of issues, but they're still in New York City. And while I don't think that's going to be as much of a drawing card as it's been in years past, because I think they're so far away from where they need to be, getting Monroe and possibly getting Aflalo would be a major upgrade over anything they had last season. So that makes sense, and it's one of a lot of moves that you and I are going to be keeping our eyes on in the next few days.
Absolutely. Next few days that will be as busy as, any free agency period. Of course, we got to remind everybody listening, and probably most people who are listening to this podcast already know that there's a free agency moratorium where there actually won't be deals inked for the first week of free agency, but we'll certainly hear about teams coming to terms or coming to agreements verbally with the guys that they're going after.
So keep it locked here on ESPN.com for all the latest news in free agency, not just with the Bulls and Cavs, but any question you may have for Dave and I on Twitter, please hit us up. Dave, on Twitter you are?
I'm at Mick10, M-C-T-E-N, and Nick, you are?
At Nick Friedell. So we'll be keeping an eye on everything going on. I think the Bulls and the Cavs are in great shape, but there are a lot of teams in the league, Dave, in the next few days that really feel like they're going to be able to make a big push towards coming closer to a title.
Yeah, and we're going to start to see it play out little piece by piece, and I know this is a fun time of the year because you just start to have your imagination run wild, and you're like, oh, that guy with what they already have, maybe they make that list we were talking about earlier of the short-term contenders.
The list is not going to grow too big, but if a team can get in there, they've done their job this summer. That's for sure. So keep it locked here on the NBA Lockdown Podcast. Nick Friedell, Dave McMenamin, we will be back with you next week, and we will recap all that we've seen over this crazy free agency period.